Hello and welcome back to the finals of the Victory Road February Series 12 Challenge in partnership with GG Tour. I am Jamie Boyt. I'm joined for one last time with Ben Kiriakou, and we are going to be featuring our final match between Joseph Ugarte and Ren Chengfu.
Yeah, these trainers have battled over the course of yesterday and today between a 9-round Swiss and the Top Cup bracket as well. These two trainers have landed into the finals and are going to be facing off against each other to decide who is going to be your February Series 12 Challenge
Three restricted Pokemon you would be expecting to be in this final, but definitely some strong pairings coming out for both of the players. So there's the Zacian Kyogre. I said a Palkia before. That was the D-shirt that we had before. It's going to be Zacian Kyogre. So we are going to be having that weather war once again between the Kyogre and the Groudon.
We are, but I do like the situation that Groudon lands itself in. We did see in the last round, unfortunately, only one set of the match between Victor Medina and Ren Chengfu, and he did manage to pilot his Groudon to a 2-0 victory against the Kyogre, and we saw some dominating performance there with the way that he used his Thunderous to just win the weather war straight off the bat, and that's really one of the things that Joe has got to be careful of in the way that he pilots his Kyogre. Of course, you have to bring both of your weather Pokemon, whether you're Ren or whether you're Joe, really in this sort of matchup, because if you don't, you're sacrificing so much advantage by not having the weather where you want it to be. But it's going to be that battle that determines in part who's going to be the victor, and of course which of the weather abusers that is on each side of the field is going to be able to come out on top.
Yeah, you've got no Tailwind coming out for saw there either, so the choice of the Life Orb is going to be very good for it. No need for the safety goggles or anything like that. So the Zapdos, wouldn't be surprised if we see that come to this match, because it does have a very, very strong place. It matches up well against the Zacian, it matches up well against the Groudon as well, so long as you can either get some max Airstreams or get in the rain and get the Hurricanes going as well. But it's definitely going to be an interesting matchup between the two teams. Got both electric flying types that could be very crucial for both players.
Yeah. Was a more supportive set, did have that prankster ability and eerie impulse and that sort of thing. This time Joe doesn't have to worry about that. He's actually going to be going against a Defiant Thunderous that we know about from the open team sheet format of this tournament, if you haven't been watching thus far. And so they both know that the Assault Vest on the Thunderous will allow it to survive moves from the Zapdos very much and be able to go for max Airstreams of its own. Of course, they do match up quite favourably. Thunderous is naturally faster than the Zapdos, so if they are going to have a max Airstream off of sorts, the Thunderous is going to be the one that comes out on top in that scenario.
But then you can just be going for something like the screens from the Grimmsnarl as well to really put a stop to the damage that can be coming out. Because if you're just going for the Airstreams in the face of just maybe a Reflect coming out, very nicely there. That's a Pokemon you want to intimidate, so if you just lead with your Thunderous, then you get that Defiant going and you do some massive damage in that regard. But we'll see if the Incineroar is even going to be coming to this match for Joe's side of the field or Ren's side of the field as well, because you've got the Focus Sash on the Incineroar, which is a very interesting item choice for the Incineroar for Ren's side. A little bit of anti-synergy with the Flare Blitz that comes out from the
to a nice little niche, I think, where the Incineroar can always survive a turn. It doesn't matter, Sacred Sword, if it's not been intimidated from a Zacian or whatever, you can certainly survive an attack and launch off a Flare Blitz of your own. And it does mean that you are able to always try and get that damage off onto the field, even if it is a little bit easy to remove the Focus Sash from contention. In most matchups and in most scenarios, in that end game scenario, it can be really handy.
Yeah, definitely. Got the Charizard that if it got the solar power going would be doing pretty good damage, and the Groudon, if it goes for the Dynamax to get the rocks rather than just the rock slide going for the rock fall instead, that would do some very nice damage as well. So it's going to be a little bit awkward to take care of that Zapdos for Ren's side of the field. There are definitely very interesting final as well.
It certainly is, and we're going to be launching straight into game one. So here we are with the leads. We can see Ren Chengfu going with that Thunderous and the Groudon, and Joe, whose side of the field, as you mentioned before, Jim, we are seeing it from, is going to be the Zapdos and the Zacian.
Yeah, so both electric flying types coming out here, probably both wanting to Dynamax as well. But interesting decision to lead with the Groudon for Ren's side of the field. Usually when you have the Weather War, it's usually better to leave your Weather Pokemon in the back. But usually Groudons as well are slower than Kyogre. So even if Joe would have led with the Kyogre, you'd probably expect that the Groudon would win the Weather War on that initial turn 0. So leading with the Groudon is going to match up pretty well into the opposing Zacian and the Zapdos. You can threaten down the Zacian with those Precipice Blades or a Max Quake. If you go for the Max Quake as well, you'll boost up the special defense so you can take on the Zapdos a bit better. And it is one of the main things that could threaten the Zapdos as well, with those Rock Falls that could be going for. If you do go for the Dynamax with the Thunderous as well, you can get the Airstream going before the opposing Zapdos, and that should put your Groudon faster. So a little bit more in Ren's favor, I would say, for this lead, mainly because the Thunderous does naturally outspeed that Zapdos. Is almost certainly going to be outspeeding it as well, but not going for the Dynamax here. It's just going to be switching straight out instead into that Incineroar.
Going for the Dynamax straight away. Interesting play there from Ren, saving the Thunderous, maybe going for a Max on the Groudon this turn, and not really fearing too much from the Zapdos, especially with a little bit of bulk and that Citrus Berry that it can use to recover some of its health. And maybe just going for the Zacian straight away with something like a Max Quake coming out here. We do see the Dynamax, so likely there is going to be a strong attack coming out from that Groudon, and maybe it doesn't matter so much on Ren's side of the field, especially if he hasn't brought his Charizard to the game, that the sun's on or off the field.
That Incineroar that did just switch in, so that is the Focus Sash broken on that Incineroar, and now the Max Lightning is going to follow up into the Incineroar as well, and is able to pick up the KO. So you've got the Intimidate down, but no fake out pressure going into this next turn. The Incineroar has just been taken care of very swiftly, but this Groudon has been given free reign to go for whatever it wants to go for, whether that's the Max Quake to get the special defense boost, or the Max Rockfall to be able to deal some very good damage to this opposing Zapdos. As a very significant chunk of damage. Another Rockfall would be able to pick up the KO, but there's no fake out coming out for the Incineroar on Ren's side of the field. That would have been very nice to put a stop to the Behemoth Blades that could come out in the next turn, but that was taken care of very quickly, and now you can't go for any Airstreams with the Thunderous anymore.
No, you can't, and this does give opportunity for Ren to go a little bit more on the offensive. We have seen that Joe didn't go for the max Ren's Zacian, and the Zacian on Joe's side of the field, of course, will be threatened very much by any attack that the Groudon wants to go for.
Yeah, so the Zacian on Joe's side of the field is going to be protecting itself, but the Behemoth Blade is going to be fired off from Ren Zacian into that Zapdos, and with the damages already taken from that Rockfall, is going to be able to pick up the KO on the Zapdos here, and it does respond with the statics, so a very, very crucial paralysis there. That's going to put the Zacian slower than the Kyogre that could be waiting in the back for
how the Kyogre is trained and how the Groudon is trained. It's technically possible for either of these Pokemon to outspeed each other, given that they naturally have the same capability of reaching the same speed stats, depending on how these trainers have trained their Pokemon. So, we could certainly see a Groudon both be able to survive a Water Spout, especially in its max form at a raised stage of special defense, but also we could just see the Groudon go for a Max Quake before the Kyogre even moves.
Yeah, it would be very crucial on how both of the Pokemon are trained, so we can't find out at the moment, so we're just gonna have to wait and see if the Water Spout goes off first or not. The Kyogre should definitely of those Water Spouts, but Behemoth Blade did fire off into the Zacian, so Zacian is going to be able to do some massive damage with the Behemoth Blade, almost certainly put that Zacian in range of the Water Spout that is coming out from that Kyogre, and even with the special defense boost it got in the rain, it is not going to survive that full HP Water Spout.
No, it's certainly not. Definitely even further going to be solidifying that KO with a critical hit landing onto that Zacian. So yeah, we'll have to see what the how much work the Thunderous in the back can do for Ren, because that's definitely a Pokemon that you want to have in front of a Kyogre if you have the opportunity to. And in this situation, we don't know what Pokemon is sitting in the back, of course, for Joe. If it's that Incineroar, it could be a little bit awkward to be able to deal with, but certainly not this turn. We're not going to find out, as the Zacian goes for a Play Rough, Kyogre goes for a Protect, and that Zacian does not manage to pick up the KO on the Thunderous.
Yes, the Precipice Blades is going to be able to be fired off onto the Zacian, and if it's able to survive this turn, then it is going to be able to finish it off with the Behemoth Blade, but nope, not going to be able to survive that attack. So it's going to be crucial on what Pokemon is waiting in the back for Joe. If it's a Pokemon with Fake Out, so whether that's going to be the Incineroar or the Rillaboom, then that would be able to put a points. It's just a Fake Out and a Water Spout, and that's the game for Joe.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be that way around, and yeah, we've seen the moves go in for Joe here, so it is indeed going to be the Fake Out Water Spout going out onto the field. I don't think the only way that you ever survive this is for your Groudon to be faster, and for you to be able to knock the Kyogre down to a range where the Water Spout doesn't KO. But Rillaboom in this position is so strong, because even if that was the case, even if the Groudon was to go first, the subsequent Grassy Glide would be able to pick up the knockout on either Pokemon. But we see the Water Spout just going into
game there for Joe. There wasn't too much that could be done after that Zacian got paralyzed. If it didn't get paralyzed, that would have been a very interesting end game, because the Zacian would have been able to go for play roughs into the opposing Kyogre. That's not a full HP water spout that's coming out anymore. Would have been able to see how the Zacian speed interact as well, because we don't get to see that if the paralysis just comes out. So that would have been a much closer end game, but that's the reason why you run static on your Zapdos instead of pressure. Pressure almost never comes into play. Static can absolutely come into play, and we've seen many times, even on the stream as well, when Pokemon get paralyzed, the speed drop is going to be crucial. The chance to not even move is going to be very crucial as well. So
ways to avoid that end game scenario, because you have to stop the Zapdos from getting its max airstreams up on the field or doing damage airstreams on the field, and maybe Zapdos gets 2 more attacks off instead of just the 1 more attack, and because of the speed boost, and then you're really on the back foot. So Ren played the right turn, I think, and got punished for it, but you know, that's the game sometimes, and that's what you have to do. But it's important to note that static, while it was detrimental and definitely gave Joe the game, it was definitely both players were playing the right game all the way through, and definitely props to both players.
Yeah, definitely could have been Ren's game if that paralysis didn't happen. So maybe both players do go for the same options. It was definitely interesting bringing the Thundurus that didn't go for a Dynamax. Usually when you're bringing the Assault Vest Thundurus, it is almost always going for that Dynamax to make use of the max airstreams, because otherwise Fly is pretty not so great an option, because you have to take that extra against the opposing Kyogre as well. If you go for the Dynamax with the Groudon, you essentially lose the option to switch out and switch back in to overwrite the rain with the Sun. You can do it at least with the Sandstorm that can come out from the Max Rockfall, but then you can get the Max Quakes going as well. Zapdos, if you go for an Airstream, that will put you faster than the opposing Zapdos. It will have to match it by going for an Airstream. And that's not the best move to be going for into the opposing Thundurus. It would have to hit the other Pokemon. If you go for a Protect and Airstream, that would be very good as well. You do end up losing that Weather Wall, but here's a definite switch up. It is going to be Incineroar and Charizard coming up for inside of the field, but Joe is sticking to what worked in Game 1 with that Zapdos and Zacian.
Yeah, and given that the Zapdos is holding a life orb, I would expect it to be trained to be fairly fast, and again, you know, like Zacian's having the potential to speed tie, Zapdos and Charizard it can possibly be, but the Zapdos may be trained to be a little bit more offensive than anything else, and so it does give this sort of opportunity for Charizard, especially in the Sun that's just come in with that Groudon, to really do some damage in this game.
Yeah, and the Charizard is going to be Dynamaxing first if both Pokemon are going for that Dynamax. So Charizard definitely could be moving before that Zapdos and get off a massive G-Max Wildfire. It could be going for the Airstream as well if it wants to match any Airstreams coming up from the opposing Zapdos. But if you're going for the Dynamax, the Charizard, and switching in your Groudon, that opens up the opportunity to go for that massive G-Max move. And the crucial. It's just Sacred Sword going into the Groudon, so not Behemoth Blade.
No, and a max airstream is going into the Charizard, so if they are indeed tying in speed. It is the Zapdos that's managed to go first this time. I don't know if that managed to survive on a slim.
It looked like it lived, and there's the Citrus Berry.
It did. Yes, the Citrus Berry going to bring it back to about 25% health. We really want to know after the game what HP that survived on. And we see there, wow, that's a strong max flare. Back to G-Max. Go off before he was able to stop that G-Max Wildfire from going on. So both the Groudon took more damage and the Zacian had a speed boost, and that's really not ideal for Ren's side of the field, especially with this Kyogre coming into play.
Yeah, and now you've got the awkward position where the Kyogre has joined the field against the Groudon. You've got to switch it out and switch it back in to be able to get that Weather Wall once again, but at least you can actually do that this time now that you've Dynamaxed the Charizard instead of the Groudon, because now you don't want to switch out your Dynamax Pokemon if you've gone for the Groudon, but now you can go for something like switching to the Incineroar, just sacrifice that Pokemon and go for a Max Guard, and then you can switch back the Groudon so that the Charizard should be able to take on both of the Pokemon in the sun. And yeah, like, you could see just how strong that G-Max move is. It is the strongest move that we have in the game. If it's able to just OHKO a neutral Zapdos in Dynamax, then yeah, you know it's pretty strong at that point. And it was pretty important that the Zapdos was able to win that speed tie and get that damage into the Groudon, because if you switch it out and switch it back in, it would have been able to take the Water Spout on the switch in. But now that it's at such low HP, if it does that and switches back in, it's just going to get KO'd to that attack now.
It is, and instead what you have to try and do is allow this Incineroar to be KO'd instead, so that you get the clean switch in. The Incineroar gets an Intimidate off onto Zacian. That's quite nice. If the Zacian switches out and switches back in, it's going to lose that speed boost, so pretty vital that it's managed to do that. And we see now that the Behemoth Blade comes out onto it, but interesting to see that we just see a max airstream coming out from the Charizard going straight into that Kyogre and getting that speed boost. A really quite nice play there, actually, knowing that the Charizard would probably outspeed it, and an Origin Pulse miss as well, really going well there for Ren, as the Incineroar does leave the field, gives way to the Groudon to come in. We see the Flames damage coming out onto the field, and now with Groudon probably
that airstream, you can just go for another airstream into the opposing Kyogre, and there's nothing that Joe can really do about it. If you protect the Kyogre, you'll still take the damage through the protect, and then you'll still take the G-Max Wildfire damage at the end of the turn, and that combination might still even be enough to pick up the knockouts. So yeah, really nice dodge there for the Charizard, somewhat making up for the speed tie loss coming from the Zapdos, but now this is still a fantastic position for Ren. You've still got the residual damage going with G-Max Wildfire, so if you go into your Zacian any points, you've chipped the Zacian with the Wildfire enough so that a Behemoth Blade would be able to pick up the knockout. You've got the Kyogre low enough that another airstream would be able to pick up the knockout. The Charizard didn't take enough damage to put it in range of the Behemoth Blade, so even though the Zacian got the airstream initially from the Zapdos, it's still faster than the Charizard. You wouldn't be able to pick up the knockout. You can at least pick up the KO on the Groudon to put a stop to any of the Behemoth Blades that could come out, but this is still a very, very strong position for the Charizard. You'd have to switch out the Kyogre into presumably the Rillaboom that we saw the last game. Now it doesn't want to take the airstream at all, especially because you're in the sun. Even an Assault Vest is not going to save you there. And so if you still want to win the Weather Wheel, you have to just switch out your Groudon.
It is, and setting grassy terrain on the field, not too significant, I think, in this game state, especially since Charizard resists, quad resists, in fact, the grass-type coverage that the Rillaboom comes in with. Kyogre just going for a protect and a max airstream coming out into it, so not quite picking up the KO, but as you said, Jamie, likely that the Wildfire Flames will be doing the rest of the work that is needed to knock out that Kyogre this turn. A Rillaboom's going to be set on the field field. Gonna have to take a Precipice Blades. Does resist and is avoided, in fact, as it turns out. So not going to be doing as much damage as it could. But with that Kyogre leaving the field now because of that G-Max Wildfire Flames, and Rillaboom taking a substantial amount of chip damage.
Facing down two Pokemon that do not want to be taking fire moves in the Zacian and the Rillaboom. You still got your own Zacian presumably waiting in the back as well. The Groudon doesn't really matter too much at this point. A Precipice Blades will knock out the Zacian, but it's not too concerned with the opposing Rillaboom. You just got to make it through this one turn of for Fake Out that can come out from the Rillaboom, then that pressure is gone. So if you just go for the Protect on the Charizard like we are seeing here, that's taken away the option of just Fake Out Protect into the opposing Charizard. Just a double Protect coming out from Ren, very safe here, and then you just get to launch.
Sure that whatever's in the back for Ren is, you know, in a position where it can actually win the game, or at least be able to hold up against a Zacian that hasn't been intimidated, because that was the other thing that got reset when Zacian switched out that turn. So I think, you know, in this situation, Joe probably has to play a little bit defensively with his Zacian and try to knock out the Groudon with Rillaboom and try and get some value there, because if the Rillaboom gets knocked out, it's Gastrodon in the back, it looks like it could be game, I think, for Ren.
Yeah, but the Blast Burn is fired off into the Rillaboom instead of the opposing Zacian, so not falling for that. Going to be able to pick up the KO on the Rillaboom, and it's going to have to take its recharge turn, but now that effectively leaves the Groudon open to be able to go for those Precipice Blades. There is the Pokemon waiting in the back. Whatever Pokemon it is at this point will probably be able to take the game for Ren. It doesn't really matter that the Charizard is going to be recharging now, because you kind of got to take care of the Charizard this turn while you can, but then you can just take a Precipice Blades. But the Blast Burn and the Precipice Blades aren't 100% accurate, so there are definitely still some outs for Joe, but it's definitely looking dicey, and if just a single attack hits that Zacian, then it's going to be game over, and we'll go into a game 3.
We will indeed, and we see the Behemoth Blade coming out onto this Zacian. Joe correctly targeting down the Groudon on this turn, predicting that it wasn't going to be going for the Protect here. And there is the Solar Power to take into account here, actually. Does look pretty close as to whether the Solar Power would knock out the Charizard this turn. And if it's the Thunderous in the back, it could be, oh no, it's a Zacian. Yeah,
it's always a Zacian.
It's absolutely a Zacian. Yeah, Ren's in a good spot. Ren's in a good spot, especially the Charizard being able to outspeed it. Joe has to go for the Protect this turn. It has to account for the Solar Power damage coming out onto the Charizard and knocking it out. If that's the case, then these two Zacians are going to be facing up against each other, but you always want to be the Zacian with full HP.
It's also going to get rid of the booster to the Blast Burn as well, but that still should be strong enough with the Life Orb to pick up the KO on the Zacian. So you got to hope for a few Blast Burn misses at this point, because if it just attacks, that should be able to pick up the knockout on the opposing Zacian. So you can at least go for a critical hit, Behemoth Blade onto the opposing Zacian, dodge 2 Blast Burns and pick up the knockouts on that. It's not the greatest odds, but when you're playing Pokemon, you've got to recognize that even the most unlikely situations, if you do need to go the turns, maybe the last turn if the Blast Burn is able to catch, which it is, so this should be sending us into that game 3.
It certainly will be, and yeah, unfortunate for Joe. It looks like he used up a lot of his luck with that triple protect in the end game there, and Charizard doesn't even get knocked out to the Life Orb. So a 2-0 victory for Ren there, bringing it back, making a fantastic adjustment and playing it fantastically as well. Just being able to have that Charizard on the field for the whole game. It's a little bit unfortunate that for Joe that the Origin Pulse did miss. That would have done a significant amount of damage and definitely changed the way that Ren had played. But of course, as soon as that happened, Ren definitely stuck his heels in and just was able to pilot his team really consistently and just play exactly the moves that he needed to play to win the game.
Yeah, so we've had very crucial turn that effectively seemed game ending at that point when it happens. So I'll have to see if that is going to be the case going into this game 3. If there's going to be something that is going to sway it in someone's favor. If there's going to be nothing at all, we get a super clean final game in this game 3, which I would be hoping for, because that would be very nice to see a Pokemon game that is super clean for once. So especially with all these Precipice Blades that are being fired off and all these Hurricanes and Blast Burns. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see going into this game 3, because the Charizard was a very, very interesting adaptation, going in the face of a Zapdos and a Kyogre as well, but definitely paid off for Ren. So we'll have to see if that's going to be the same thing going into this game 3.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if Joe plays his Rain a little bit more proactively. I feel like Ren has been playing his Sun really proactively, especially in game 2, where he's really trying to bring it onto the field, where Joe seems to be taking the opportunity to do some damage, absolutely, but being a little bit more conservative in the way that the game 2 played out, where the Kyogre wasn't able to switch it out and switch it back in again for risk of the damage that the Charizard would have done onto anything that switched in. It kind of made it a little bit difficult, but I'd really like to see that from Joe, to see if he can really utilize that Kyogre just that little bit more and show us exactly what it can do when it's let loose.
Yeah, and we'll have to see if both players are going with the Zapdos and the Charizard once again, because that was a very crucial turn as well. If both players go for the same thing in Dynamax, whichever moves first to dictate the pace of the game. If the Charizard moves first and just knocks out the Zapdos, that's a wasted max for Joe. If the Zapdos this time, it could go for something like a Max Lightning into the Charizard. That would probably pick up the KO. So instead of going for the Airstream into the what was the Groudon switch in, which switched out for the Incineroar, if you win the Speed tie and just get the Max Lightning into the Charizard, that will probably just pick up a KO. And both players have the opportunity, if that is the same situation that both players want to go for, they have the opportunity to just take out the opposing Max in the first turn. So that could be a very explosive one if that's what it comes down to. We'll have to see if both players are going to opt for both of the leads that worked out well for them. The Zacian and Zapdos does seem to work out well for Joe's side of the field. Leading the Kyogre in the back is always a good idea against the opposing Groudons. If you like the Zacian, that means that you can't switch out into the Kyogre to counteract the Groudon switch in, because you will always switch first because your Zacian's so fast. So we'll have to see, is it going to be Zapdos versus Charizard once again? Are we going to get a speed tie in that first turn or once again?
Yeah, indeed, and here we go. We see the Groudon and the Incineroar coming out from Ren's side of the field, and that same lead of Zapdos coming out from Joe's side of the field. So no Charizard here, not in the lead at least. We may see that in the back a little bit later on, but it does give Joe the opportunity to start going for those max Airstreams. And also it gives the Kyogre a little bit more room to switch in this scenario and start putting pressure on, especially with Groudon being in the lead at the start of the game. Zacian, don't really think wants to stay in here, doesn't want to be around, especially in front of two Pokemon that can really do without facing up against. And if you look at the speed tiers of the Pokemon on Ren's side of the field, without speed control being in play, the Zacian doesn't actually need a speed boost to outspeed any of them and go for big attacks. And so, yeah, I don't think the getting the speed boost on the Zacian is the biggest priority there for Joe, at least in this matchup.
especially if that Charizard is waiting in the back. You probably don't want to be using your Dynamax too early, and that might be why Joe is switching out the Zapdos into that Kyogre, so switching in the face of something like a Precipice Blades being launched off by the opposing Groudon. But if it does make it through the turn unscathed, it will be able to just go for a max HP Water Spout into both Pokemon. But a Dynamax is coming out for Ren's side of the field. It is almost certainly going to be that Groudon, so losing the Weather War immediately on this first of the game 3, but can be going for those Max Quakes to boost up the special defense. Should be able to take on the Kyogre a lot better if it goes for that. And Max Rockfall would also help because it would overwrite the Rain at least as well. So the Zacian is just going to go for the Protect, keeping itself safe from the Fake Out that was launched into that Zacian from the Incineroar, and it is going to be a Max Quake launched off as well, and could be targeting down that Kyogre. That would be an amazing prediction, but no, just into the opposing Zacian. That is going to give you the special defense boost, but now the Kyogre switched in completely for free in the rain at full HP.
Indeed, and one of the nice ways that you can use Kyogre in this situation, especially because the Thundurus was left at home for Ren in the previous match, is you could definitely argue from Joe's side of the field that going for a Max Kyogre would be really effective in this matchup, because the Charizard wouldn't appreciate it. The Groudon certainly doesn't, and neither does the Incineroar. So it would have to be the Gastrodon instead of the Zacian on Ren. Gastrodon, even with the great ability that it has in a Kyogre matchup, does seem difficult to do, but he's done it. He's absolutely done it.
Yeah, so there might not be a Charizard, to be fair. We haven't seen all 4 of the Pokemon on Ren's side of the field, but the Gastrodon is switching in on the potential of the Behemoth Blade, but no, the Behemoth Blade hits into that Groudon, so it is absolutely going to be in range of this full HP Water Spout, but that does give the Gastrodon the opportunity to get that Storm Drain boost, so it'll be able to take on the Zacian a lot better as well. But that is the Dynamax used up immediately for Ren. It was able to get just 1 Max Quake, and because they committed to that, they can't switch in the Groudon to get that Sun anymore. The Kyogre has won the Weather War, but it is now facing down that Gastrodon.
And you know, the Zacian's already been intimidated once. Could be intimidated again in this turn. We haven't seen a max yet, but you can't really max your Kyogre when you're staring down a Gastrodon, so it would be the Water Spouts that would be the main threat coming out from Joe, and that does mean that the Kyogre is weak to being faked out in this turn. But if, like in previous games, Joe has his Rillaboom sitting in the back, there's no reason that Joe couldn't just maybe do a little bit of switching around, a little bit of adjusting, allow that Gastrodon to get some special attack boost, because you know that you've got Grassy Glide sitting in the back, and really try to win the game that way.
Zacian is going to be joining the field here, so it was Charizard that was left on the bench this time. The Charizard did so well in that previous game and didn't come to this game 3 at all, was sacrificed for the Gastrodon instead. Could be very nice going up against that Kyogre, but like you said, if that Rillaboom is still waiting in the back, that does make it a lot more awkward for that Gastrodon, especially because the max has been used up for Ren's side of the field at this point. We may finally get to see the speed interactions between the opposing Zacians, and which one is going to be trained faster, and if Ren's is trained faster, so that could be a knockout onto the opposing Zacian if you go for the Behemoth Blade, but that would open up that Grassy died into it at some point.
You do, and yeah, so I'm struggling to see how Ren is able to really reposition and adjust here. Start to the turn. Origin Pulse coming out from Joe's side of the field, not opting to Water Spout just in case Ren decided to go for an attack onto Kyogre, and that Origin Pulse actually landing its mark and hitting that Zacian is enough to knock it out with a critical hit. Oh my god, definitely a really important critical hit there, as a Yawn goes off from the Gastrodon into the Kyogre. So next turn, especially since there's 2 Pokemon left on the field for free Pokemon, sorry, on Joe's side of the field, so he can switch out his Kyogre to avoid that. And yeah, now we have confirmation that the Rillaboom is indeed in play, and with the Groudon knocked out and the Zacian.
Yes.
Yeah, Zacian knocked out. Thank you very much, Jamie. Really struggling with the words there. We've been saying Zacian already too much this stream, but yeah,
you're going to be saying it for months to come as well.
Absolutely.
It's going to be so common.
Yeah, there's no switch outs there for the Gastrodon, so it's really going to be quite simple for the Rillaboom to target down that Gastrodon when and how it wants to.
Yeah, this is how it wants to. It wants to G-Max drum solo it, so that will put a stop to any of the fake outs that can go into that Rillaboom. A very smart decision here, because you could have gone for the fake out into the Incineroar, but then that opens you up to the +2 Ice Beam. You could have gone for the fake out trade, but then that opens up the Flare Blitz to go into the Rillaboom. This puts a stop to any potential play that Ren could have gone for. Like you can see here, the fake out landing into the Rillaboom does not matter. Here comes a KO onto at least 10 Gastrodons from this drum solo, absolutely blowing it back. There's no more yawn on Joe's side of the field either. The Kyogre did decide to switch out there, and now it's just going to be a formality at this point. The Focus Sash is not going to save that Incineroar from 3 attacks coming in from either Pokemon. So it looks like Joe is going to be taking this Game 3 and the championship.
He is indeed, as we see Joe lock in his moves there, and the battle cancelled. Ren knows that Incineroar is not enough to be able to knock out free opponent Pokemon, and it will be indeed. Joe's
So another Zacian and Kyogre is triumphant here, so definitely a pairing that you need to be prepared for. We saw quite a lot of players in the top cut opt for Zacian and Kyogre as their pairing, and it is the pairing that has come out on top, so it absolutely needs to be something that you are prepared to go up against, and it seemed like a lot of the players were prepared for it, but still able to come out on top here.
Yeah, and I think, that speaks to the type of team that Joe's built here. A lot of the Zacian Kyogre teams that we've seen tend to opt to Tornadus and a little bit more of an aggressive play style, where Joe, even though he's used what looked to be a fairly speedy and aggressive Kyogre from what we've seen of it already, the backup that he's had is a little bit different, using that Zapdos rather than a Tornadus to gain speed control and not relying on just setting up Tailwind and to win the game before Tailwind ends. Does merit itself to a little bit more of a consistent play style, and that's exactly what we saw him use to pilot himself to victory in this tournament.
Yeah, consistent is definitely a word I would attach to Joseph here. Just getting so far into like so many tournaments, winning quite a few of them as well. So here's another one to another accolade to his belt here. So congratulations to Joe for winning this tournament, and that seems like it's going to be it from us for this February Series 12 challenge. So thank you very much for watching, and congratulations to Joe, your champion.